Ali, as you mentioned, just a ton of things going on today in the fight against Ebola here in America and in West Africa. You know, one of the most interesting and surprising things that came out today was the fact that this Liberian national, who was admitted into the hospital just this past weekend and was said that he was infected with the Ebola virus, the apartment that he was staying in last week has actually not been cleaned out by the CDC or Texas health officials. Shocking, because, as we know, Ebola is only transmitted through bodily fluids. So he was having diarrhea, he was throwing up, and he was sweating all over blankets and furniture inside that apartment. And the worst part about this is that inside that apartment currently right now is 4 people that were there with him last week. One of them was his caretaker when he first got ill. CDC and health officials say that they're going in hazmat suits and they're going to take out some of that debris and try to dispose of it. But in the meantime, the question is, those people that are being quarantined in that apartment, have they come down with the Ebola infection because of what occurred? Then, on the other front, in West Africa, Ali, today, the Associated Press and other outlets reporting that Liberian officials say they're going to prosecute this Liberian man who came to the U.S. when he recovers, if indeed he recovers, and he heads back to West Africa. They think that he lied on the paperwork at the airport, saying that he had not been exposed to anyone who had the Ebola infection, when indeed they say that he helped carry a pregnant woman out of a taxi into some sort of health unit, and they say that she was infected with the Ebola infection and eventually died. He said that he didn't do that. So lots of things going on here, an amazing amount of news to cover in the coming days. Ali?
Yeah. All right, Robert, thanks for your reporting on this. Robert Ray joining us from Atlanta. So far, 3,091 people have died this year from infection in Liberia and neighboring West African countries. Now, the number of cases diagnosed tops 6,500, but the CDC warns that number could rise to 1.5 million by early next year if more moves to check the spread of the virus in Africa are not undertaken. And the Ebola scare is hitting local economies. Sierra Leone has put a quarter of that country's territory under quarantine. In Liberia, U.S. oil and gas giant ExxonMobil said today the Ebola scare is disrupting drilling operations there. The company said it's preventing employee travel to all affected countries, all except for the U.S., of course, and it says it's taking measures to protect worker families. Okay, Ebola is dangerous, but it isn't easily transmitted. The CDC says the virus spreads through contact with an infected person's bodily fluids, and only when that person is showing symptoms. The virus is said to take up to 21 days after infection before a patient starts feeling sick. And to date, there is no vaccine for Ebola out there. There are some experimental treatments for it, though. One in particular holds promise because 2 Americans survived Ebola after contracting it this past July in Africa. It's called ZMapp, and the federal government is now racing to get it into the hands of doctors who need it. Mary Snow has more.
Inside this Dallas hospital, where the first patient to be diagnosed with Ebola in the United States is being treated, there's one experimental drug not available to him. It's called ZMapp, and it was given to 2 U.S. missionaries who survived Ebola this summer.
Most of you know that I took an experimental drug called ZMapp.
Today is a miraculous day.
But there's no more of this experimental drug. ZMapp's developers said on their website that by August 12th, the available supply of ZMapp has been exhausted. That's why the federal government is stepping in to ramp up production, and it's getting help from 2 big charitable foundations trying to speed along ZMapp. It's a mixture of antibodies produced in tobacco plants. An official with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services tells Real Money HHS is exploring a variety of options to expand production of ZMapp, including working with other producers of tobacco-based pharmaceuticals. But there are challenges.
It's not that we can just start an assembly line and start mass producing these products. By the beginning of 2015, even with very concerted efforts, only treatments for hundreds or perhaps a few thousand patients are going to become available.
And then there's the question of whether it even works. The company that makes ZMapp admits it doesn't know. It's only been tested in monkeys. Clinical trials can take years. But time is not something doctors have, so agencies are pushing forward. There's now an urgent need for drugs to treat Ebola since there's no vaccine to prevent the virus, first diagnosed in 1976. One economist says for drug companies, it comes down to the bottom line. Costs to research and develop vaccines are high, and companies limit investments in profitable drugs, such as cancer drugs.
So I think that there is a lot of evidence. Essentially, the pharmaceutical industry does, to an important extent, follow the money. That is, that they are much more likely to develop treatments for diseases that people in the United States and other high-income countries have than they are to develop so-called drugs for neglected diseases.
Mary Snow, Al Jazeera.
Well, one pharmaceutical giant that's working on developing a vaccine is Britain's GlaxoSmithKline. Last year, the company acquired Swiss-based Okairos, which has been working with the U.S. National Institutes of Health since 2003 to develop an antiviral vaccine that targets Ebola. This summer, after the worst Ebola outbreak ever hit 3 countries in West Africa, the World Health Organization asked Glaxo to fast-track human trials of the vaccine for emergency use. Donna Altenpole is the Vice President of Public Policy for GlaxoSmithKline. She joins us now from Philadelphia. Donna, this is something everybody's suddenly very interested in. You heard in Mary's story that, generally speaking, pharmaceutical companies, especially Western-based ones, focus on diseases or conditions that will be present in the West. Where are we with an Ebola vaccine or Ebola treatment?
Well, right now we are still in the phase 1 trials. That's started in the beginning of September. So as you mentioned, the World Health Organization did ask GSK if we would now move into phase 1 trials, which includes human trials. So there are 4 trials planned, 3 of which have started. On September 2nd, 2 trials started in the U.S., sponsored by the National Institutes for Health. And then another trial involving 60 people started at Oxford University. Shortly, we plan to do 2 more trials in West Africa, in the countries of Mali and Gambia.
And tell me about these trials. How long are they? Do you have to sort of finish these 2 before you start the other 2, or can they go concurrently?
Yes, well, safety obviously is the foremost concern. So in a phase 1 trial, what you're really studying is the safety of the vaccine. Does it produce any unwarranted side effects? You also begin to look a little bit about, is it effective? Is it actually providing the immune response you need to prevent Ebola? So we're going to complete these phase 1 trials hopefully by the end of this year, and from there we will then go into phase 2 trials, which will put more scrutiny on the efficacy of the vaccine. And by mid-2015, we'll work with the World Health Organization to see if we should make this vaccine available for emergency use situations, for example, healthcare workers.
And what does the fast tracking mean? Does that shorten the amount of approval time, or does it shorten the amount of testing that you have to do?
It's a little of both. So you would have to do a lot of studies and a lot of reporting to get into the phase 1 trial. Basically, the regulators have expedited that. The candidate vaccine that we're talking about was safe and effective in primates, so we're now naturally moving into the human trials, and we are doing it on a safe but expedited process.
And now, Donna, where, based on this fast track, this is a U.S. FDA fast track. What then happens in other countries? Do you typically have to go through the same process if it proves that this drug is effective, the vaccine is effective?
Well, what's really nice about this process is it's a collaborative effort. We're actually working with the UK government, we're working with multiple governments, the World Health Organization. So it's a great example of private industry, governments, and charitable organizations all coming together to try to address this horrific epidemic. So we're working both with regulators in the UK and the FDA to get these approvals to fast track this vaccine. But it is a joint effort, international effort.
Now, what's the danger? Obviously, there's a reason we test drugs usually in 3 phases, and we test them over time. Obviously, when we look at fast tracking, is someone accepting the liability that, hey, there may not be things we discover for a few more years because we fast tracked?
Well, that's why we're approaching this very cautiously. We are not at all hindering the safety component that's naturally built into a clinical trial. So we're doing a staggered approach in the phase 1 trials, really closely monitoring the people that have tried the vaccine. It's a lot of monitoring, a lot of data collection, and that's why we're being cautious about the acceleration. We really want to get through the phase 1 trials to really understand the safety. Fortunately, to date, it's moving pretty much as we predicted, which is excellent, and we hope to get into the phase 2 trials by the beginning of 2015. But safety is of utmost concern, and we will not compromise safety as we go down this regulatory accelerated process.
Donna, thank you for joining us and sharing this with us. Donna Alton-Pohl is Vice President of Public Policy at GlaxoSmithKline, joining me from Philadelphia. Well, with the midterm elections just weeks away, Democrats would like to take